Okay, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about this book called Rethink Communication. It's by Phil Bowdle, and I'm going to start by just saying what a wonderful book this was to read. Wonderful because of how quick it is to get through. The way he writes it makes it a very easy read, and he writes it in such a manner that he is actually applying his message that he's trying to bring into his writing style. So this book deals with how to communicate a message properly. We sing on church messages. It can be whether it's trying to bring a vision to your leadership or trying to announce a new ministry to your congregation. He talks about the way church communication hasn't kept up with the way the world has changed. You think about email, text messaging, all the sort of different avenues of communication that has just led our world into what we are living now. The church has sadly lagged behind. He starts talking about attendance and engagement, and that how both of those things have drastically changed in our church. He talking about how attendance isn't just physical, whether like people sitting in your pews, and that's very true now with the pandemic and everything shutting down. Attendance is also views if you're doing online services and things of that nature. There's also the aspect of ministries, how people are getting involved in your church. And really what he's found is that over the years, all those avenues of attendance have dropped greatly. Because of the drop, he's saying that we need to realize that the old ways, the old tactics of reaching people don't work anymore. He's giving a demonstration in the first couple chapters about communication being a street, really, in that I'll show you the picture, but he talks about the street being your process of communication. That before we had this digital age, whether it's social media, texting, email, all this other things, there was really only it was a one-way road with communication. And talks about this, that the only way that pastors or leaders communicated to their people was either through their message, through their sermon, or what they print for them, whether that's bulletins or the Bible or whatever else. But now we need to focus on the two-way communication. We have social media, we have internet, we have video and email, all these other things that help us to engage our congregation. They can reach us just as easily as we can reach them. It's the church truly being the church. It's telling people that, people coming to sit in the pews shouldn't just be consumers anymore. I think that's a strong message. It's a sermon that a lot of times we hear, but with the development of the digital age and all these different avenues of reaching out, it is easy for us to be the church, to reach out to others. It is not just the job or the role of the pastors or the people in leadership to try to make those connections with their people. He puts a striking emphasis on how we need to connect with people when we are talking with them. That we have to be intentional. And the realization is that on average, we may only talk to each individual person in our congregation or our community 8 to 10 times a year. And I don't mean just saying hellos, like, I mean actual connection with those people, or even a small conversation. And even in those 8 to 10 times that we actually get to talk to those people, we may only be talking with them on average for like 10 seconds. The reality that we only talk with those people for a short period of time is just the nature of the digital age, is that we all have shortened attention spans. I think there's an aspect of the instant gratification that our culture has, our world has now, that has delayed or really killed our sense of patience. There's probably a number of you that have already got tired of this video and I left it because of that, but you wouldn't know that. So he goes on to talk about how we have to develop our speaking methods in order to effectively communicate. That we have to really clarify and construct a simple message, not simple in the theology or simple in what we're trying to teach, but simple in the delivery. He brings up the term like elevator pitch, which is the elevator pitch is just simply how do you boil your message down to something that you can effectively communicate in an elevator ride. I remember going through this with our leadership in my church, where we were going over what our vision and mission statement, and it was essentially that, just what are we trying to communicate to our community, that what we are, who we are as a church. So it talks about developing your elevator pitch and testing it on people. Also, wanted to point out that at the end of each chapter of this book, he gives a really quick summary of what the whole chapter was about and kind of next step questions that you need to answer. And usually calls them action steps. For example, right now, let's see. You have this. It says, action step: craft your elevator pitch, and it really has. It blocks out each major concept that he talked about in that chapter and kind of gives you a next steps, like what are you supposed to do now. That's part of what made this book such a quick read and really helped solidify the information that he was trying to give you. Next chapter, he really is going over, or the next section of the book, he's going over how to develop your communication plan. He begins with this quote from Benjamin Franklin: "If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail." Now, it's a quote I've heard a lot from my head pastor, just talking about how we are going forward with things in our church. So Phil Bowdle emphasizes the necessity to make plans. Make plans not just for different ministries that you're having or different messages, but make plans for how you're communicating those messages. This is a great great example. It says, for every message you communicate and the things you create, you can pick two of these three things. And those three things being great, fast, or cheap. You can only pick two. So no matter what two you pick, there's an aspect of it that you're going to leave out. The one that you should settle with is that great and cheap is the thing that you have to settle with as a pastor usually. And so what you're sacrificing is speed. So you're not going to be able to communicate your message quickly if it's great and you do it cost effective. And really what he says here is your message is too important to have to settle for fast cheap. He offers an example for a communication plan, and it's a breakdown of what you're trying to present. So he offers an example of what he's calling a communication plan, and it's a week by week breakdown of what needs to happen for whatever you're trying to communicate. But he gives an example of Easter, and he says, the first week beginning February 24th, you begin your feature announcement on a loop or a video loop if your church has those capabilities, and it kind of goes down. The next week, maybe you do a stage announcement with one or two social media posts. The following week, you do a video promotion for it with maybe 3 posts, and it just goes on. He just goes through with how to properly bring up announcements and things. Later on in the book, he talks about bringing announcements up in terms of next steps. We don't want to miss people in the details, and a lot of times we feel that as pastors or as laity, people speaking, we have to bring a lot to when we're speaking in front of people. But really what happens is when we're talking too much, we bury people with details, and pretty soon they do not want to participate, or they don't even want to be involved in any way or shape. So really we're doing damage to ourselves by trying to do too much. Yeah, so he says when you're talking about announcements, you talk about them in terms of next steps, and you speak vaguely about them. That's at least when you were talking from the platform. Well, one thing I did kind of go over though was he brings up barriers between ourselves, the audience, and what the win is, and the win usually being was our message a success or not? Did people hear our message, and did it call them to act, and did they take that call? He talks about being able to identify the barriers between your target audience, yourself, and whatever your win is. And the most important thing, like I said, is the identification of it. Knowing what stands in between you reaching your target audience reaching what your perceived win, and you understanding what the win should be. Barrier between ourselves as the speaker and the win could be time. If you have enough time to deliver the message that you want to. The barrier between target audience and your win could look something like if you're trying to start a new ministry or a Bible study for young couples or like families, something like that. Is there a daycare provided? Is it at a time that they can meet properly? Will there be food? All these other things that seem trivial, but they really are an aspect of what's going to be hindering people from attending or from really wanting to be involved and really hearing your message. What you want to try to do is identify those barriers and then being able to answer them properly. Another aspect he puts forward is knowing the different roles when it comes to developing messages. And by the different roles, I mean the people in your leadership. So you either have dreamers or doers. And it's important to understand that each of those people bring something valuable to the table. Dreamers usually bring creativity. They bring an ability to bring a new message, the ability that doing things differently that were never done before. And I think that's important because one of the biggest problems with any business, and a lot of times you can look at church that way. The biggest problem is when people say, well, we've always done it this way. So it's really important to have those dreamers on your team. And the reverse of that is the doers. You need those people who have the responsibility to check on your timelines that you've developed with that communication plan that I talked about earlier. People who are going to keep things on task, and who are able to communicate the barriers, like I said just before. Most importantly is that when we're trying to execute our messages, it's important that we are always aware of what's happening. It's important that we are recording the steps that we took to deliver the message that we did, so that we know what worked and what didn't. This awareness, I think, is something that a lot of times is lost in churches, especially smaller ones, that people continue on with how things have always been. I think about different fundraisers and different events that are held, and there's no real fruit from it. There's no real developing discipleship. There's no people coming to the faith because of it. It's just done because someone decided to do it years ago and it works, but it really doesn't, because it's not something that's like I said, bringing people to Christ. It's just something that the church has always done to be busy. That's what's most effective in our communication. It's not overwhelming ourselves with busyness of the church, and to not overwhelm the church with announcements. So that's really why it's really important to evaluate everything that is happening in the church and every message that you're trying to communicate. You're trying to figure out, am I spending enough time on this that I need to, or am I wasting time and energy on this? So if you're interested in this book, I recommend. There's so much more to gain from this. I cannot do it the proper justice to summarize it, but I'll probably read it again just because there's so much to learn. But ultimately, like I said, this book is such a wonderful read just because of the way that he wrote it and designed it. I think it's kind of funny that honestly he wrote this book applying the lessons that he is trying to teach us. And so I sat down and I think I read this in 2 sittings. It was that great. It was that great, and it wasn't a novel, and I read it in 2 sittings. So yeah, so thanks for watching. If this is any value to you, I hope that's the case, and share it with other people. So thank you for your time. Have a blessed day.